the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Direct, O Lord, all our actions by thy holy inspirations, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, so that every prayer and work of ours may begin from thee and by thee, be happy then through Christ our Lord. Amen. Mother of divine grace, pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. Okay, this conference is on common courtesy. Now, the problem with common courtesy is that it's not so common these days. And common means that it's generally, it's what you generally give to everybody, right? It's not just to a certain few people, but it's a courtesy that you give to everybody. So we want to actually talk about, well, what is actually courtesy? There's different definitions. They all kind of revolve around the same thing, but we want to talk about specific points. Sometimes it's defined as excellence of manners or social conduct. So it's excellence in manners and social conduct. It's behavior marked by polished manners or respect for others. That's a key point because courtesy isn't just good manners. It's actually in relationship to other people specifically. That you're actually doing something in relationship to other people. Sometimes it's called consideration, cooperation, and generosity in providing something for somebody else. So there is a kind of politeness, a courteousness, an affability in relationship to doing something for someone else. It's how you're relating to them in a certain sense. Sometimes it's just called polite behavior. What does polite mean? Polite means marked by or showing consideration for others. It also includes tact and observance of accepted societal usage. In other words, that you're normally being aware of other people, what society generally expects, etc. Obviously, in our society, which is very disordered, it doesn't mean, however, that there shouldn't be certain kind of courtesies, we would say, or certain things that you wouldn't do, certain kinds of behavior in relationship to other people. Tact is a sensitivity to what is proper and appropriate in dealing with others, including the ability to speak or act without offending somebody. So that's what tact is. Right? So someone who gets angry and then chews somebody out, they're tactless in a certain sense. So it's really that ability to in dealing with others, making sure that how you're interacting with them is done in a way that is not going to offend them, generally speaking is going to be pleasant, or is going to provide something for them. So when you take all that together, basically common courtesy, or courtesy it's a set of habits, which we'll talk about here in a minute, by which we are able to engage other people or work around other people or do things with other people, which includes kind of an affability, a pleasantness in which we're looking out for their betterment, or we're putting them ahead of ourselves in a certain way, in certain matters. This basically is in relationship to small things, primarily. You know, when you're talking about big things, it's one thing. But when you're talking about little things like opening the door for somebody or just making sure when someone comes in and sits down they're comfortable or have what they need, these are common courtesies that we do for other people. We'll talk about this in just a little bit. If you step out of a room and you're in a hallway and you see other people coming, you don't just stand there in the road, right? You get out of the way because why? Well, we'll see that in a minute. The first reason is it's a matter of humility. You have to have humility to have common courtesy. Humility is actually part of it. Why? Because you recognize in going out of your way to help somebody else or do something for somebody else that you're actually not the center of the universe. And you're showing yourself not to be the center of the universe. You're seeing with this, I won't mention the generation, we all know who it is, that they were trained, they were formed this way, so I'm not hacking at them on that level, but they were actually formed to be completely self-absorbed. And as a result of that, they have no ability to recognize that they're not the center of the universe. They think they're the center of the universe, and their whole behavior revolves around them they're being the center of the universe. And as a result of that, we have to be able to have that ability to put others first in small matters. And this is something that generation completely lacks, right? They themselves are always first in every single little matter that there is. So, you're walking down a hallway, they just get right in the way. It's your obligation to walk around them, not them to kind of get themselves out of the way because they're in the way, right? They don't see the necessity for that. Whereas common courtesy is, having the humility to recognize that I'm not the center of the universe, I'm not that important, so I'm going to get out of the way. Or when you see somebody, they drive up to a crosswalk, right? If you're crossing them a crosswalk, common courtesy is that you speed up a little bit because you don't want to make the person wait unduly for you going across. Today, people they see you standing there waiting on them, and they just saunter and keep going and just, take their sweet little time getting across. Sometimes you wonder if they're not slowing down a little bit, etc. But the point being is that there's no sense whatsoever of a humility of, look, I'm not that important. Okay. So you have to work on that humility. The second is circumspection. In other words, if you're going to be courteous, you have to watch out for people. You have to pay attention to see what do they need. So when you're walking out a door at a grocery store, you don't just let the door slam on the person behind you. You have to pay attention to see if there's someone there, and if they're not, then you can let the door go. But otherwise, you hold the door for them as a matter of common courtesy. Except for guys do it for women. Women can do it for each other, I suppose, and guys do it for each other to some degree, especially if he's carrying something or something like that. But as a general rule, you kind of pay attention to others, and that means you have to be watching around your surroundings. Now, if you're the center of the universe, you're just not going to see this. Now, this brings up a very important point, because the immanentism, which is the foundation of modernism in the Catholic Church, the heresy of modernism, the immanence principle basically makes the individual and his experience the judgment and standard for what is true and what's not. And so what happens is once the principle of immanence takes over, not just in the church and in the heresy, but in a culture, which we're actually seeing now, in the end, one of the first things that's going to collapse is common courtesies, because why should I hold the door for you? I'm just going through the door. I'm the center of the universe. What's good for me and my experience is actually tantamount to anything that you would happen to be experiencing. Okay. You have to have a basic knowledge of what takes priority in life, right? So, and this is important, and not just in your life, but in everybody's lives, and as we live in common and in society. Society is not a group of little individuals in their own isolation. It's actually everybody living based upon the natural laws, having a common interaction in life together. As a result of that, people should recognize, and this is something that is very important, one person's emotional state or their comfort doesn't take precedence over the legitimate service to other people. Just because it would be uncomfortable for me to hold the door doesn't mean I just let it slam on the person that's next, that's behind me. Or just because I don't want to be interrupted while I'm texting, meanwhile everybody is driving around you or walking around you. Or another place that you see, which is a basic failure in common courtesy, is in driving. If you see that a guy is not going to be able to get out because the traffic's too heavy, well, then you let him out into the traffic. Or the other one that's a real beaut is, I don't know if you have this in Atlanta, but we have this problem in Colorado. You get a guy who sits in the fast lane at 75 miles an hour, he's doing 50 miles an hour, and he will not get out of that lane, even though he's going constantly by the signs that says, slower traffic, keep right. Why is he sitting in that lane? Because it's comfortable, and because that way he doesn't have to deal with merging traffic in the right-hand lanes, right? And so in the meantime, everybody has to go around him, right? So the point being is that it's just a basic lack of common courtesy that you're seeing actually happen in relationship to people because they become more and more self-absorbed. Okay. It requires decorum, which we talked a little bit about earlier. This is knowing what is suitable in treating others, especially in relationship to your own behavior. The thing about common courtesy, and this is one of the key things, common courtesy is actually, ironically, more about how you are acting as an individual in relationship to others than it really is about other people. So even if someone else is being discourteous, it doesn't mean that you should be discourteous, as I mentioned in the other conference. Just because some other schluck doesn't hold the door doesn't mean you shouldn't do it either. And so this is something that we have to continue to work on, is something that we actually recognize that I want to do this because I want to be courteous. I want to be affable. I want to actually be the type of person that contributes to the good of the society, the pleasantness of society, etc., and not just be another cog in this self-absorbed wheel, so to speak. It also requires justice. People have a right to be treated a certain way based on who they are. So sometimes courteousness also means that it can also mean in the sense that we curb like our anger or how we're dealing with certain people. When it comes to people who are in a position of authority, that we treat them with proper respect, etc., a certain kind of courteousness in relationship to that, because sometimes that's what the term courteous can sometimes mean. But it just means that my manners and behavior, which is really my mode, how I'm behaving, fits somebody who is pleasant to live with in a common society and actually contributes to the society in small manners such as these. This is one of the reasons why there were always customs, right? It was always custom for the guy to hold the door for the woman coming out of the store or something like that. It was always custom for these things to do so, but those died precipitously because people became more self-absorbed. But you have to have a certain sense of justice. People should be treated a certain way. Also, a certain kind of gratitude, thanking. Part of courteousness is just, when people do something good for you, you thank them, right? And you actually show that you appreciate what they've actually done for you, etc., and in a proportionate manner. And this is, so, if someone holds the door for you, you always say thank you, etc. And so there's a certain, again, this courteousness is all about establishing an interaction in the social life that is pleasant and that is actually conducive. And why do we make it pleasant? So that it's actually conducive to the virtue of other people, and it's conducive to a common life that is not fraught with difficulties and perils and difficulties unnecessarily on little things. The virtues, you also need the virtues following under fortitude. You have to have a certain magnanimity. This is when a person seeks excellence in all things. Now, normally it's in great things, but courteousness is in little things. So a person who's magnanimous will actually be the one who will go out of their way, because why? That's how they show the greatness of their virtue, by making sure that they're tending to other people's little needs or things that could be helpful to them. Patience. You have to be willing to suffer evils. You have to be willing to wait. So if you're going to let the guy in traffic, you got to wait a little bit, right, in order to let him in. You have to have a kind of equanimity in the face of evils. When people are acting badly, you should still remain courteous. Courteousness can kind of smooth things out and greatly contribute to charity in that regard. I think that part of the reason that people are so angry all the time is because nobody's courteous to each other. I mean, people are just obnoxious, quite frankly. Mortification, you have to, as I mentioned, willing to suffer. Charity, you have to have kind of a love of God and love of neighbor for God's sake. Benevolence, you have to have goodwill towards people. This is one of the things, even if people treat us badly, again, Christ was constantly, if you look at the scriptures, he's constantly saying, look, if you see the speck in the other guys, look at the plank in your own. He's constantly trying to get people to, wait a minute, look at yourself first. Look to see, your primary obligation is to your own spiritual development, so you have to work on that. And so even if people are just courteous, there should be a certain benevolence, a goodwill that we have towards other people, just generally. It doesn't mean that we always extend the effects of that benevolence, especially if it's going to be harmful to somebody, but generally speaking, we should be benevolent towards other people. That also means we have to have a certain sense of beneficence, that is, being willingness to do good for other people. When people are self-absorbed, the only thing they're worried about is placating their emotions and their appetites and feeding themselves rather than, what is actually best for this particular person over here. What can I do for this individual over here? So people who, and this is the sad thing about the principle of immanence, because it turns the focus to the inside, it destroys charity, because charity is about God. And even in relationship to ourselves, it's only loving ourselves for his sake, and it's other people's for his sake. And also it destroys benevolence, because why? Because people are only going to be focused on themselves and not what's willing the good for other people. It's going to and that's, in the end, people's focus is going to become pleasure and comfort, which is why Christ said in the end times, charity will grow cold and people become lovers of pleasure. So that's one of the things that we're seeing shift. But all of this destroys this basic common courtesy, which the common courtesy actually makes that pleasantness and the interaction with other people. It makes common life enjoyable to actually be around. I mean, I'm sure all of us would basically agree, not that I would make Walmart as a standard, but hardly anybody wants to go to a Walmart. Why? Because people are just basically crude brutes walking around in Walmart. One time my sister sent me these things that people have worn to Walmart. First picture, sent her the text and said, please don't send that to me again. Right. Okay. The point being is that part of courteousness is just trying to have that affability and pleasantness so that there's proper social interaction. Obviously, when you see these pictures of people rushing into a mall and they're beating each other over the head because it's Black Friday, obviously there's a lack of courtesy in our culture. Okay. One must have the desire for a better social life. That's part of benevolence. You have to actually have a desire for a better societal life. And people just don't have any. They're just out for themselves. This can also be the product of greed. When people become greedy, they can become discourteous. Technically, it's part of, they become mean. That's the daughter. St. Thomas says the daughter of avarice is meanness, and which is kind of a subtle cruelty, which can actually occur. And that's actually, I think, what we're seeing a little bit to some degree. When people become avaristic, which is part of the difficulty in our society, that's one of the things that you'll see. It doesn't matter if others, as I mentioned, are brutes. Courtesy is a virtue that you have, courtesy, or the virtues that go along with courtesy are the things that you have to develop for your sake. It might be considered an actual sub-virtue to affability, because affability is the virtue of friendship. It's the one in which we make ourselves pleasant to other people. But courtesy implies that you're actually doing something in relationship to other people. So you respond to them in a way that's courteous, that it's affable, that it's actually pleasant, or that it's actually good or positive. You don't treat them contrary to their dignity of their office or things of that sort. You actually go out of your way to make sure that they have little things that they need. So it kind of involves a little bit of hospitality. But here we're talking about not necessarily in your own home, but it just has to do with outside when you're around. Or when you pull into a parking lot, you don't just go busting out, and making this other guy have to wait before he can pull in. You let the guy pull in, and then you get out, etc. So there's watching other people and making sure you put them first in the little things. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
Yes. I'm guilty of this myself, but there's one thing that does tend to cause charity to grow cold in people, and that is when someone offers to hold a door open or offers to help you, and you refuse their assistance.
Yeah, you get that sometimes with, you get that sometimes with women who are feminists. Like as a guy, you'll hold the door and someone goes, I don't need you to hold the door for me. No, that's not why I'm holding the door. I'm not holding the door because you need it. I'm holding the door because it's a matter of courtesy, and you're a human being, and I'm trying to show respect for you. Of course, they can't grasp that because all they're seeing is everything through the prism. But yeah, that's true. We have to also be willing to be the object of people's courtesies. Ultimately, we have to let people be courteous to us. Okay.
I see that a lot in older patients, where they are starting to lose their ability to drive. They're starting to lose some of their independence, but yet they claim they don't want to be a burden on their families.
Right.
I don't want my children to take time off from work to take me to the doctor. I don't have a ride. I can't come see you.
That's right.
Because I don't have a ride. Well, what about your family? Well, I don't want to bother them, because they have to take off work.
Right.
Or childcare issues.
Right. And part of that is just basically the necessity of them to master humility. The other thing is, too, is in the past, they used to say that people who suffered from disabilities, their primary contribution to society was the opportunity for other people to grow in virtue. That's why that God allows them there. That's why they're there, is so that other people, they're the opportunity. They help other people grow in virtue by being the object. That just means they have to really work on humility, be willing to suffer that. So, okay, yeah.
So the act of common courtesy is more an act of selflessness.
It is, yeah. It's a recognition that, well, it's like I said, you're not putting yourself first. You're putting, forward this little thing in this person's life as before what comfort or whatever you have in relationship to yourself. It's a form of self-sacrifice in a certain sense. But it's primarily recognizing that the good of societal life takes precedent over my comfort and my emotional appetites, basically.
Father, when you're talking about having dignity even with people who are disagreeable or something like that, what about the case when you're a parent with an adult child who is being very deriding, condescending, talking to you?
Well, the first thing is that you don't lose your own compartment. The second thing is you have to, one of the things I have learned a lot in dealing with a lot of people is a lot of times people vent, especially parents, will vent on kids, or kids will vent on parents, or vice versa, or even in relationship to other people venting on other people. It really has less to do with the individual than it does the person has this emotional state which they don't want to refrain and conquer and suffer, and they just want to let it out so that they don't have to deal with it. That's really what it boils down to. That really this is just a person emoting. This is just a person venting. This is just a person they're not even thinking about the collateral damage it's happening necessarily. They're just thinking, this is what I want. This is how I want it. Whereas, and that's actually the whole problem of circumspection, right? Because circumspection, St. Thomas says, it's one of the first virtues lost and the last perfected. And the reason being is because it just takes just a little bit of an emotional state. And if we don't have that psychological separation from how we feel to what we know is what we should be doing, if we don't have that psychological separation, we will just get sucked into it, and everything looks through the prism of that emotion, and so we act according to the emotion, which destroys the circumspection. Because emotion does one thing primarily. The first thing that emotion does is it draws your attention inward. That's what it does. It draws your intellectual focus to your interior state. And so as a result of that, it destroys circumspection. And so the first thing you have to do is just realize, look, don't take it personally. You know, even if someone else was this person's mother or father or whatever, they would be acting the same way given this lack of virtue that they have in this particular case.
So you still should react in a dignified manner.
That's right.
Not basically come down on them
Right.
the same way.
The thing is in situations like that, you have to, again, part of the circumspection is paying what's best for this person spiritually. How can I diffuse this person's wanting to follow their emotions and get them more rational so we can actually talk about this? Or so that they can think more clearly. Rather than taking it personally, because the minute you take it personally, the focus becomes internally again, and then it's just tit for tat. So.
Father, when you have, this is kind of along the same lines, it's like a lack of appreciation. So you do keep doing things with someone, they just don't appreciate it, take it for granted, that kind of thing. So your temptation is, I'm not going to do this anymore. Is that right, or how do you,
Well, the temptation is really is again about yourself, right?
Yeah.
So that's just be careful. So what you have to do is you have to look at it based upon, is this good for the person? Is this continuing doing this? Is this helping the person or making it worse? If it's making it worse, then you stop.
Right.
Or and so in other words, is this person just becoming more and more of an ingrate? Well, then I need to stop until they actually recognize the value of what I'm doing for them. But you don't. Again, it's not about you. It's about what's best for this particular individual. Okay. If you'll kneel, I'll give you a blessing. Benedictio Deum omnipotentis Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti super vos et mani et semper. Amen.